Hello, it's a pleasure to be here for another episode of citiesabc.com interviews and profiles with leading thought leaders and global experts and leaders that are transforming the world we live, especially in a time when things are upside down and we have a digital disruption going from economics to healthcare and a lot of other things. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome to the citiesabc.com series of interviews and podcasts with a person I deeply admire and I know for a couple of years, Michael Terpin. So Michael Terpin, well, we could speak probably 10 minutes or 20 just as introduction, but I'll try to summarize and let him speak as well. So Michael is one of the leading global blockchain experts, as well as technologist, was in the past the creator of MarketWire and social radios, but as well now leading worldwide the Transform Group that includes the leading Bitcoin and crypto event Coin Agenda and the BitAngels, and as well one of the recognized leaders in the industry that has, I think, three angles that are quite unique: a thought leader, an industry policymaker, and as well an active agent that has been both an ambassador but pushing the positive of the industry. And as well, of course, if you look at some of the highlights, he was the first PR, besides of course creating MarketWire, which is in itself a massive achievement, but as well creating, being the first PR responsible for Ethereum and a lot of other, we could go especially on the crypto industry. All the achievements of Michael are completely unique. So Michael, welcome to our series of interviews. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, Michael, I would like to start, and I think for the ones that don't know your history, I always like to go for the history of people. Could you give us a bit of your history from your background, education, until your career?
Sure. So I grew up in upstate New York, just in Buffalo, New York, near Niagara Falls. For international folks, usually know that town better. And just always knew from a young age that I wanted to be a writer. And, that sort of led me to go to the Newhouse School of Journalism, Public Communications at Syracuse University for my bachelor's. And, really just kind of was trying to figure out, whether they didn't have jobs for the great American novelist. And I wanted to be a magazine writer, and those were hard jobs to get. So I started out in daily newspaper reporting, and then that led me into the PR world, where I had a couple of jobs early in my career, working as a PR director at two universities, and also on a couple of Olympic Games. And then I started my own firm in 1990. It's been 30 years now that I've been in this space. And then just I always just followed whatever I thought was something that interested me personally and that I thought would be growing faster than the economy overall. In the 90s, that was video games and consumer electronics. And I always figured if I learned about technologies before the reporters did, they would always take my call because I could, clue them into what's hot before they know about it or explain what it does. And the internet was sort of the first big, break. In 1992, I started dabbling with it, and in 93, I started what was the seed of what became Internet Wire, which became MarketWire. As a spinoff from my PR firm. It was the first internet-based press release distribution company, which was funded by Sequoia. But before we spun that off, the Terpin Group was my first PR firm, and we represented, both big companies like TIAC and Shinhan, and we were the agency of record for Konami in the video game world for many years. And then also just did an awful lot of the dot-coms of the era. That was sort of the ICO of 20 years ago, and sold that firm in 2000, just as I pivoted to take money in from Sequoia to expand the MarketWire. And MarketWire then was sold in 2006. It's we partnered with NASDAQ to come up with the name MarketWire to expand it beyond just the internet, because we weren't just for internet companies. We were using internet versus satellite as a protocol. And that was brand new back in the early 90s, and we quickly took a lot of market share. And it then, the NASDAQ merged it later on with a satellite network that was called Prime Zone. It's now called, the combined entity is called Globe Newswire, and NASDAQ sold it about a year and a half ago to Apollo, $9 billion company in the New York Stock Exchange. I sold my first PR firm to a roll-up that then ended up with FT Consulting, which is also New York Stock Exchange, multi-billion-dollar companies. So perhaps I have one more exit left in my career to a multi-billion-dollar company, and then I can just go and play with what I really love to do, which is helping entrepreneurs with startups and watching them go from nothing to something. Meeting Vitalik for the first time, and when he first had the pre-white paper, and other folks seeing him go from I think the blockchain is one of the fastest growing spaces where you can see something going from an idea to a really accepted protocol, and the speed with which that happened from 2013 when I first got in through I'd say about early 2018 when the frenzy kind of peaked, and regulators around the world decided they wanted to slow it down with not so much regulation, but vague regulation and enforcement actions. And that's sort of where we're sitting now. And I think the coronavirus pandemic is going to make some proposals to let people invest money willingly into startups a little bit easier than it's been before, but we'll get to that later. So I started Transform after, again, Social Radius was one of the early social media companies that I started after selling MarketWire. And that kind of rolled into doing big company social media for places like Philips and, Marriott were some of our clients, and Bombay Sapphire. And then, starting with early startup companies in the Bitcoin space in early 2013, including the first ICO. And that's really where I started in early 2013 as well. Started BitAngels with David Johnston, who I met at the first Bitcoin Foundation conference, and we've done a number of things over the years together. And we can talk about where BitAngels has gone from kind of a ragtag DIY effort around a lunch table at the Bitcoin Foundation to where we've been up to about 15 cities before the lockdowns, and now we're doing virtual BitAngels. We have one on this Friday. You can go to bitangels.network and find out about that. And today we actually, in about an hour, have this won't air until then, but this is mid-April I'm talking. But just go to the sites and see what's up next. Coinagenda.com for Coinagenda. I really envisioned as being the Goldman Sachs conference of crypto. Because so many conferences were multi-purpose. They'd have a track on investing, they'd have a track on consensus mechanisms, they would have a track on libertarian philosophies, and people would come to see my track on investing, and they'd say, well, I love what your panel said or what your keynote said, but I had no idea what everybody else was talking about. And so I thought, to get the traditional investing community involved in Bitcoin and blockchain, we needed to have both a network with BitAngels, and then what started as an annual conference, we got up to 5 times a year in 2018, when we had Europe, Asia, a summit, our global conference in Las Vegas, and then our Caribbean conference in Puerto Rico, which we just had in February before everything locked down. And we're still hoping to have our 7th annual global conference in October in Las Vegas, we'll just see how much the city has opened up and whether we'll be able to do it at a casino or whether we're going to do it, at a university. We did half of it at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas last year, and it might be easier just with social distancing and all that.
So that's a fantastic career, to say less, from multi-billion dollars companies to radical new innovation and as well disruption on the Bitcoin, crypto, and blockchain. So one question before we go to all these different details. So from the experience in the internet industry and pre-internet industry to the internet industry and then to the blockchain industry, there was a massive shift in technology and investment, and even in the way you look from a corporate perspective, because of course, like you said, there's a libertarian part in the crypto industry and the blockchain industry, but as well an industry enterprise side. So how do you see the shift from the internet years to the blockchain years? And right now, of course, with COVID-19, we are in another angle as well. So especially these two angles, how do you see that shift? Because you are part of both.
Well, as they say, history doesn't repeat, but it tends to rhyme. And, I see a lot of corollaries between what happened in the growth of the internet. At first, it was really laughed at. I remember in '94, it was when I launched Internet Wire at a conference where we were the only internet company in an interactive conference, because back then interactive meant multimedia, CD-ROMs. And literally I had people coming up to me and asking whether they had to make a deal with Mark Andreessen to get on the internet or put up a website. I mean, that was, and I had, I was based in Los Angeles at that point, and I had, major studios and networks telling me that they would never go on the internet because it's just too difficult. Their mom is not going to get a second phone line and put up with beep, 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 beep in the middle of the night. And, it's all about the GUI. I mean, the internet in 1994, 95, for the average person was a horrific experience. And you didn't have audio yet. You didn't have video. Once you got video, it was, really grainy and slow. And, now you can watch Netflix on your iPhone. So the speed and the graphic user interface is what made all the difference for adoption. And I believe we're going to see another wave of that. We've been growing at the same pace as social media did and as the early web did in blockchain. But we're still stuck in kind of the 94, 95 era. And there's usually a very rapid pace of adoption between the early adopters who have a different set of needs than the early mainstream. And I think that there's a few things that need to happen. I've got a thought leadership piece in CoinDesk today on the homepage called "Is Crypto Having Its Zoom Moment?" And we actually worked as a client with Zoom in their early days when they had a $30 million valuation versus how many tens of billions they are right now. And, they took off before this crisis, but now they've really become mainstream. And my thought was, who's going to step up in the crypto industry to take one of the applications of crypto mainstream when we're distanced? I mean, obviously, the biggest one, right now people use crypto for store value and for speculation, and that's Bitcoin. Ethereum is still very early. I mean, it took a year to even develop the basic platform, but you now have your first wave of DeFi on it, and that's been causing the value of Ethereum to go up as more people start looking for ways to get, significantly more than 0.1% interest on their money, and they can do that through DeFi. And there's just a whole wide array of applications that I'm very excited about, going through hypergrowth in the next few years. And I do believe that the token sale market's going to come back as well. If you told anybody in 2001, after 9/11, that there would ever be another .com finance, they would laugh at you. And yet 2 years later, Google went public. They just didn't call themselves Google.com, but they were a consumer internet company. And then Facebook. And if you look today, who are the largest, most profitable companies on earth that are actually growing despite the rest of the market getting hammered? Amazon, Netflix. I mean, these were all consumer internet companies that did not exist in 1994. And that's the promise of the blockchain 20 years from now. And it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. It will go from its current adoption of maybe 1% of the world market, if that, 50 million. Maybe we're at 1%, less than 1%, to 10%. And then once you get to 10%, it moves very quickly because you have the tools, you've got the sort of safety. I think what really is going to be required to get there, aside from just easier interface, is going to be easier onboarding. I mean, right now, people will say, I want to buy some Bitcoin. How do I do it? And I have to point them to an exchange where they have to go through just, days of KYC to buy $50. And so, there's new things out there like, Folds deal with Visa where you get, your credit card bills rounded up and you get to keep it in Bitcoin. Or there's a gift card now that you can, get it's almost like a savings bond in Bitcoin. So there's a lot of innovation that's happening now, and I think that once you have more clarity and ease of onboarding, and I think one of the things that's going to require that is to have a major telephone company that already has all your KYC, they know where you live, they've got your driver's license, buy or partner with a major exchange. And then all of a sudden you've got 100 million people who are using that telco, whether it's Verizon or T-Mobile or whoever, and they run a promotion and say, switch to T-Mobile and get, $100 worth of free tokens, including the hit new game, Angry Birds blockchain. And that's coming. And gaming is usually the first killer app of mainstream adoption. Remember Pokemon Go? I mean, we never went too much further than that in the AR space, but there was a little period of time people were running around, trying to find their Pokemon Go characters. And I think you're going to find that Uncle Milty moment, as I like to call it, in blockchain within the next 2-3 years.
That's I think a fantastic analogy from the history. It doesn't repeat but rhyme, and as well what is happening. So two questions on the blockchain side. So the first one is, you were in the inception of Bitcoin and the inception of crypto, and there's the part of trading and investment, the ICO industry, all the tokens, and that somehow didn't collapse, like you said.
Well, it was early in Bitcoin. I wasn't there at the inception. I was at the inception of the ICO.
No, I understand. But 2014,
BitAngels did the very first ICO.
Yeah, but if you look at Bitcoin, it's 2011. You were 2014. It's 2 years. So, and of course, initially the first 2 years were very dark. There was almost not a lot of people involved. Let's put it that way.
It's interesting because obviously those were really critical years. If you got in 2013, you were able to buy Bitcoin for $11 at the start of the year, and even by July, it was still, you could buy $65 Bitcoin. I remember speaking to the New York Angels about the promise of Bitcoin in July of 2013, and I just got blank stares, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, the only thing Bitcoin can be used for is drugs and prostitutes, and you better run away as fast as possible. And that was speaking to 100 investors who had just listened to a pitch for a social bicycle app. They invested in it.
Yeah, but that is a very good point, and that's my question comes out of that. So from the Bitcoin origins in 2011 to 2014, where the ICOs start initially, actually the ICOs, to be honest, was more 2015, 16 that starts really coming, at least in a bigger scale. So you went through all this inception and all these different parts. And so on the crypto side, we are right now in 2020, so it passed 7 years. And to be honest, if you look at, can we say that partly crypto industry at a meltdown, but not the blockchain. How do you see that part? I would like to ask someone like you your opinion on that, because that's a very
Well, the market, just like the stock market is doing now, has had several cycles. The typical cycle since the Fed was created 100 years ago, 106 years ago, was, has been 7 to 10 year bull markets, where pretty much you just buy the S&P and you're going to do better than bank interest, other than the few years where CDs were really high in the 80s and early 90s. And not including the period where it was really flat during the 40s and 50s and early 60s. But for the most part, you have these 7 to 10 year bull markets, and particularly the last few ones with all the money printing, and since they started letting companies buy their own stock. The stock market has been a great place to be as long as you got in at the bottom and then sold out before the top. And the top usually happened when there was a crisis that you couldn't kind of print your way out of quickly. And 9/11, now the pandemic, and of course the great housing bubble. So we were already overheated in terms of what the PE was, and if you back out the stock buybacks, the PEs were astronomical. So really, there's been not much growth. It's a lot of charts. You can look this up if you just Google the keywords, or just watch Max Kaiser any day of any of the 3 days of the week he's on, or read Zero Hedge. Or there's just a lot of hard data on how overheated the stock market has been. Harry Dent is a good friend of mine. He's an economist. He's written a number of books, and he basically said that the economy at 2008 should have kept going down or been flat, but instead the money printing just kept it soaring to way above where it should be. We shouldn't be talking as should it be 30,000 or 24,000 without the money printing, without the stock buybacks. You'd be still scratching around 10. But that's that ability of the U.S. to there's a meme going around now. Brrr, goes the money printer, and we've shown that any of the past arguments about responsibility for budget deficits and our grandchildren will be paying for this. No one's going to be paying for this. We're in an interest rate of 0.1 right now, and I saw a presentation the other day that said that the interest we're paying right now on this gigantic national debt is actually less than we were paying in the 80s when interest rates were 15%. So it's comparable to the size of the economy. So, this is all, part of the game plan of fiat money. And it keeps going until, like the stock market, until a black swan, disrupts everything. And, we had the pandemic for the stock market, and the initial reaction, of course, of crypto was to flee to the US dollar like everybody else. But, the US dollar is, all indications are that it's in the descent, and the RMB and perhaps Bitcoin and gold are on the ascent. And we just don't know exactly when, but, I'm a firm believer that even if we have some disruptions that are caused by stock market meltdowns and people fleeing for cash, they're gonna still be offset by the new people coming into Bitcoin, which they are right now. And as more people get into Bitcoin, then they learn about Ethereum, then they learn about what you can do with programmable blockchains. And, like I said, we're still kind of in the equivalent era of the internet before Netscape went public. There's no public blockchain companies. When Coinbase goes public, when Bitmain goes public, and you can sort of see Binance, perhaps you can sort of see what types of profit margins are involved with successful companies as they go into a bull market. Then all of a sudden, I think you're going to have another bull market for not just the stocks, but for the assets themselves. First and foremost, Bitcoin. And, when Bitcoin gets a cold, the rest of crypto gets pneumonia. When Bitcoin moons, it certainly helps a lot of other aspects of the infrastructure, because people who were early in and who believe in building on top of it, now have a lot more wealth. If you figure that 10 million of the 21 million Bitcoins that ever exist were earned initially by mining, in the first 4 years when the average price was under $1, there's a handful of people who you may not even know who've got 10, 20, 30, 50, 100,000 Bitcoin, which when Bitcoin inevitably hits 50,000, I think probably this cycle, or 100, 200,000 in 5 to 9 years, do the math on 100,000 times 100,000, and you get a pretty large number.
Yeah, that's a lot of things there. So a couple of just some details on that. So you created the BitAngels in May 2013 and CoinAgenda in 2014 in January. So from that inception, so there's almost three divisions in terms of what you see as the crypto evolution. There's the first one that was Bitcoin, the second with the ICO explosion and everything that came out of that. And now we are going through another one, which is kind of the digital currencies, which we cannot say that is crypto, but somehow it came out of this, with Facebook being, or the Facebook digital currency being probably the exponential, and as well the Chinese government new digital currency that is as well powered by blockchain. So how do you see these three iterations, and as well the impact that we have in the world? Because of course, with the crypto still going, and Binance and all the ones you mentioned, CoinAgenda, CoinDesk, and all these big players that are the biggest ones. But then you have, of course, I'm talking from a crypto analogy, then I go to blockchain. Then you have definitely the Ethereums, the mainstream tokens, which are still the biggest in the world, from Cardano to Ethereum and so forth. And then, of course, right now we have the iterations that are mainstream global players. That is, of course, the Libra of Facebook is not working as they would like to, but it's still a major achievement for something that comes out of crypto inception. And of course, Chinese government officially moving forward with this. How do you see these three iterations of the crypto universe?
Well, just like the internet spun off to a lot of different internet applications. I mean, what Salesforce.com does is very different than what Amazon does, and very different than what Facebook or Google do. These are stacks that are built on the internet. And, I've said for years that we're going to build stacks on top of basic blockchain systems. And there's not just one basic blockchain. There's not just one stack. You've got the Bitcoin stack, and they're trying to build Lightning on top of that and other things. I personally think that Bitcoin will remain as a store of value, but that other players will be able to innovate for payments. And payments is all about being fast, reliable, and inexpensive. And, I think that Bitcoin just has a legacy problem there. So I think that it is absolutely going to be the store of value because, it's never been hacked. It's already got a lot of people treating it like digital gold, and I think that will be more so. And, so that's, it's been said that the goal is to get to 10% of the value of gold, which at the time, I think I heard that first said, the value of gold was about maybe 6 trillion globally, and now it's probably closer to 10 trillion. And, a trillion of Bitcoin is about 8 or 9 times where we are today. But I think that in this environment of excessive money printing, the price of gold is probably going to double. And so that means that you might have a 200 trillion or 300 trillion dollars worth of Bitcoin. And there's only 20 million Bitcoin. The price of going up means the price of each unit has to go up. And so that's store value. Payments, are all about speed and about universal acceptability. And then you've got sovereign coins, which are about governments adopting them primarily as sort of just a digital version of their central banks. It's like Tether, they get to mint and burn, except I don't think central banks ever burn. And so the digital RMB is going to, I think, be an explosive development. I think it's going to have impact far outside of China. I think that people will use it instead of had Libra been able to develop at its original game plan, that people all over the world, particularly in the third world, are going to start using digital RMB inside of WhatsApp, inside of Alipay, inside of Alibaba. The way that they use cell phone minutes in Kenya, and it gives them something other than their local currency. I mean, if I'm in Argentina or in Venezuela, and holding on to USD $1,000 equivalent of my currency means it's worth $500 a couple months later. I want dollars, and if I can't get dollars because the U.S. is very limiting in how I can get those, or your country is very limiting in, say, buying, Tether and USD equivalents, other stable coins, I think are going to be very sought after in the third world as stores of value. For those who think that Bitcoin is, fluctuates too much, well, the U.S. dollar is pretty consistent that it goes down in value 4% every year. But if it's the benchmark, then, and yours is going down 40%, then you're okay. But I think that as China gets the digital RMB into more and more hands of consumers, they're going to start thinking about buying things in RMB.
So, and when it comes to the blockchain enterprise, so we have in one end the crypto part, and I want to touch the blockchain enterprise, the use of blockchain, like you mentioned, like the internet, it took 20 years to become mainstream, and then all the different iterations. How do you see the blockchain and actually the comparison between blockchain and internet? Because this is a very important thing, even to demystify blockchain. And how do you see the major applications of the technology in itself?
So, I mean, there's a battle still for platforms, right? So I mentioned two of the applications, store of value and payments, but programmability and having the next layer of software, the blockchain that apps are built on, that's still up for grabs. I'd say Ethereum is certainly the one that's most ahead right now, but they also have issues with speed and with getting clogged. And they keep talking about Ethereum 2.0 being 2 years down the road, and it seems like it's whatever today is plus 2 years, whatever anybody asks. So what you've had forks of Ethereum, like Ethereum Classic. You've had people going and just taking some of the open source code and creating their own EVM products. I'm a co-founder of a company called Aspire. It's aspire.tech. It is not launched yet. It's sort of it's launched in its sort of beta test mode, but it is up and running. And it basically takes it's a re-envisioning of Counterparty, which was built so that you could actually run the Ethereum virtual machine on top of it. And we're working on that right now. And when that's out, we'll be able to do everything that that Ethereum does in ERC20, 721, you name it, but for a fraction of the fees and a much higher speed. So that's going to be launching later this year. Jim Blasco has worked with me on a number of projects as sort of the technology partner of Transform for about 6 years. He came up with that idea, and we funded it through my incubator, BeCommerce Labs, and now it's rolled out as a standalone Nevada company. And it's just equity based right now, but as token sales come back, and I'm really hopeful I mean, right now, when token sales come back, I'll have to block the U.S., even though it's a U.S. company, just because of the way the vagueness of the laws are, even though it's clearly not a security, since they said Ethereum is the security. But I'm hopeful that the Hester Peirce proposal for having a 3-year safe harbor for when you launch, to say you have 3 years to build a community to show that you're sufficiently decentralized or useful and not having any other hallmark of a security, will bring back the token sale market in a big way. Just like the token sale market was dead, by the way, in early 2015. You had Ethereum, which raised $18 million. Nobody else came close to that. And the few that you had coming out early in the year were, raising 100,000 here, 100,000 there. Price of Bitcoin had crashed. Just like I said, the stock market is in its 7 to 10 year slow bull markets, and then a sudden crash, and then the Fed jumps in and pours money in it and rescues the rich, and the poor get crushed. It's the opposite in Bitcoin. It's a 4-year cycle, which we're just entering the halving, and it's typically a 4-year bear market with little bull traps along the way, until all of a sudden you have a supply squeeze about a year and a half after the halving, when you have a parabolic run-up. And the first parabolic run-up in end of 2013, year and days after the first halving, was 100x from the halving price. And then 4 years later, the halving of 2016 was about a little over $600, and kind of went down from there and just wobbled around. And then by the end of 2017, you had a parabolic run up at the end of that year to almost 20,000. And so that was 100x, then 30x. What's the next logical sequence in the series, given that the growth has been at about the same pace? 10x maybe?
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff to digest over there. So we are in time of space. We don't have a lot of time right now. So in terms of what is happening right now in the world, and looking at your fantastic career and multiplicity of different things you've been doing and being involved, and as well being always a step, or actually a lot of steps ahead, how do you see what is happening in the world right now when you touch some parts, like especially in the financial markets and capital markets, that we have a massive right now crash, to say less. We have probably the worst meltdown in the last 100 years. So we are in a verge with COVID-19 pandemic, and as well all the consequences around that. This is really shifting everything we know about it. And Bitcoin has been kind of surviving, let's be honest. But as well, how do you look at the experience and this moment in history?
Oh, it's more than survived. It's double the price that it was a year ago.
Yeah.
So it's certainly, I mean, there's no 2-year period, that you could have lost money, unless you just, like, there was a handful of days you could have bought a little too high, and a handful of days you could have sold too low. But we're pretty much on the curve that goes with the stock to flow ratio that was talked about in the excellent book that came out in 2018, the Bitcoin Standard, that talks about how Bitcoin will become the new gold standard of sound money, and because it has all the qualities of gold, if not more, and it's also something that you can move around more easily than gold, and you can't be frisked for Bitcoin at a border. I think that we're going to keep continuing along those lines, and that we're going to, it's still very early.
And as well, in terms of the general industry and in terms of the COVID-19, because this is bringing a huge opportunity in terms of digital transformation. Of course, a lot of opportunities will be kind of accelerated on technology development, especially by.
So a lot of it depends on what the ultimate response is. If you listen to some people, we're going to be locked down for 2 years, and even when places open up, no one's going to come out. And CDC just twice in the last week, even though the current head of the CDC, a Trump appointee, has no real background in this area. He was heading up research for a university. And I think one of his political reasons was because he was, parading around the country saying that you can cure AIDS by just preaching abstinence. So they have some very odd people running the different parts of government right now. But at any rate, if it's true that next winter is going to be worse than this winter, and we effectively have a 2-year lockdown where there's no major events, there's no travel, and you have to print money to keep all these industries from going under. I mean, I live here in Puerto Rico. We're very reliant on tourism. I also spend a lot of time and have some investments in Las Vegas, and that's a town that's completely reliant on tourism. I mean, if you can't open the casinos, you have 100% unemployment practically, and you just can't print that much money. I mean, if you're looking at 2 years, you're talking about printing $50 trillion, not $5 trillion or $6 trillion. And at what point does the excess U.S. dollars in the market, affect the forex and affect the price of gold? Because the price of gold knows how much dollars there are, which is why you can't even buy physical gold. You go to any of the major gold sites now and try to buy physical gold as opposed to the ETFs, which are a promise of future delivery. I think people got afraid of the ETF markets when oil went to zero the other day for delivery, because there was no place we're living in unbelievably strange times, and I think that this is the perfect environment for both Bitcoin as a store of value and for blockchain as a way to do things like, we haven't even gotten to provenance and supply chain, which are being shown how the current supply chain models are still pretty much brick and mortar. I mean, even the internet really didn't solve a lot of these papers. Still by the port of Los Angeles, which is still closed.
Yeah, there's a lot
Blockchain
of things.
can do it a lot more.
I think we have a delay in I think it's good now. So probably as the last, I think you have a limited of time. So last question.
5 more minutes, yes.
Okay, so the principles of blockchain is about decentralization, and ultimately there's 2 ways of looking at the economy. One is, like you said, print more money and create a kind of a meltdown of fake dollar and fake currencies all over the planet, or then create a more sustainable society, which is actually was the premises of blockchain technology and the ICOs, of creating a more sustainable kind of peer-to-peer community and the society. Do you believe on that? How do you see that part as being one of the...
So I would say that decentralization is only one of the tenets of what makes a blockchain. Tokenization and proof, that you can't hack an audit trail, which can be done without being decentralized. Just ask IBM or Microsoft, who, are using Hyperledger to do that. It is a blockchain, but it's a permissioned blockchain or a private blockchain. And I think that in general, public blockchains are the ones that are going to succeed, just as the internet, succeeded over intranets. Again, going back to the mid-90s, Walmart and GE, they were afraid of the internet. They were like saying, well, I like the idea of being online, but I don't want to have it be controlled by, people who can hack my system. So we'll go and build our own intranet. And then they realized that, it's not very easy building your own scalable internet, and that it was easier building tools that took away your concerns. I mean, Mark Andreessen had an interview many years ago talking about, what problems needed to be solved for the internet to scale and how the same things are going to happen with blockchain. When he first got funded to do Netscape, he all of a sudden, went into the New York Times and said, hey, you should put the New York Times online. And they're like, why would we want to do that? We like selling paper copies. Why would we want to give it away? He went to Macy's, and they said, why on earth would we go and get people not in our stores And besides, it's not like anybody would ever trust the internet with a credit card. Well, for all of these problems, there was a multi-billion-dollar company that solved them. Can't put a credit card? Here's VeriSign. Don't know anybody on the internet? Here's Facebook. Can't find anything on the internet? Here's Google. And so Mark Andreessen said he believes that there are opportunities for all of these problems that you see with blockchain right now to be solved by multi-billion-dollar companies. And whether those are token companies, or whether those are service companies, or whether those are exchanges, or whether those are development arms, or whether those are, private companies using private blockchains, or using, stacks on top of a public blockchain. I mean, the biggest uses of the internet right now are all private stacks on top of a public on top of a public internet. Amazon, Google, Facebook, they control your data, but they don't control the internet. They basically rely on the internet. If the internet broke, they would break. And so I think we're going to have interesting years ahead to see how that model plays out with public, private, and permission blockchains going and making more efficient models of initially store value and payments, then supply chain, provenance, and then all the way down the road where if it can be done better, faster, cheaper with a blockchain, someone will bring that to market, and the free market will prevail.
That's a great way to probably conclude. And I don't know if you want, just for the audience listening to us, which is becoming a big global audience, do you want to talk about your present main projects? I know you continue very active with Coin Agenda.
So I'm starting something called Content Syndicate, and it's sort of as I brought Michael Schuler, who was my co-founder at MarketWire, back into the game, and he's now running a couple of newswires that are partnered with Globe, the place that I sold it to, with blockchain Newswire for blockchain, and then also NGO Wire for nonprofits and corporate social responsibility. We've got a legal wire rolling out, a class action lawsuit wire, a medical wire, a small cap wire, and the ultimate vision there is to be able to go and have a blockchain component in addition to the the internet distribution, which the company that I built and sold, that doesn't fine. I'm not going to reinvent that, but to be able to prove years later where something still is, because right now you can't do that. And that's the perfect use case for blockchain. So we're working on that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic. And I think this is part of the blockchain wire that you've been working on this. So where people
blockchain wire is a subset of Content Syndicate that has a much broader vision.
Okay. I don't know, well, if you still have time just to explain that, I think would be interesting, and as well probably a bit about Coin Agenda, just to wrap up.
Sure. Coin Agenda has been going on since 2014, physically, annually in Las Vegas in October, typically around the Money 2020 conferences, and in the spring in Puerto Rico, and usually in February or March. And we've also done events in Europe and in Asia. Right now, with coronavirus shutting things down, we are doing virtual events once a month. They're much shorter. They're about an hour and a half. Today that we're filming this, I have an event that should still be archived, where I'm interviewing Bruce Fenton, former executive director of the Bitcoin Foundation and founder of Satoshi Roundtable, who has got a lot of press lately for his efforts to open source hacking ventilators so that hospitals can not run out of ventilators when they need them. And then I also have one of the top people from the National Science Foundation's Rapid Grant Program. They also have grants for blockchain companies, as well as very fast ones if you have a blockchain or non-blockchain solution that will help the COVID situation right now in any way, shape, or form. They can get you grants very quickly, like within a couple weeks. and then a panel on what the blockchain is doing for COVID, featuring 3 CEOs who have active initiatives. Eric Benz, the CEO of Changely, Ben Gertzel, the CEO of SingularityNet, and Pradeep Gold from CEO of Solve.care. And next month we're going to do something after the halving about what happened, and I'm going to bring in some Bitcoin experts as well as some mining experts.
Just one last question on the BitAngels. So you've been since 2014. What is BitAngels doing right now? I think just to get that.
Well, right now we're virtual because the 15 chapters that have been doing monthly or bi-monthly in-person meetings, they're all in cities that are shut down. So we have a best of cities once a month. The first one is this Friday, April 24th. This may be later than that. And then some of the actual cities are going to be doing their own virtual events. And, we're hoping that the cities start opening up enough so that it's not impossible to get 50 people together for a breakfast event with social distancing, by the summer in most of these cities. Maybe New York will be the last, but in Nevada, we're certainly hoping that, and San Juan, we're certainly hoping that we can return to some kind of normalcy with, obviously safety precautions by the summer.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. I think we are in the last part. Wishing you all the best, and as well keep safe over there. And I think we're going to put in the interview, so this will be 3 parts. There's an interview, will be syndicated in different channels, and as well we're going to be putting a bio profile of yours that will pass for you to make a proper documentary on you.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Okay, great.
Cheers.
Right.
Thank
all
you.
Right. Bye-bye.